Imagine sitting inside a bunker made of reinforced concrete. Its walls are nearly 5 feet thick. Machine guns are loaded. Thousands of rounds of ammunition are stacked beside you. Outside, your officers have promised that this fortress can survive artillery, tanks, and even aerial bombardment. For months you've believed them. After all, this is the Westwall, what the Allies called the Siegfried Line. One of the most heavily fortified defensive systems ever built. But then, you hear something different. Not the crash of artillery. Not the rumble of tanks. Instead, a strange hissing sound. It grows louder. Someone outside yells in English. A split second later, liquid fire shoots through every firing slit, ventilation opening, and doorway. The temperature inside the bunker explodes. The air itself becomes impossible to breathe. Within seconds, the concrete fortress that once felt invincible transforms into a blazing oven. Some soldiers run. Some surrender. Others never make it out. So what changed? How did a weapon with a range shorter than a football field become one of the most terrifying tools used against Hitler's mighty defenses? And why did veteran German soldiers, men who had survived years of brutal combat, often abandon bunkers the moment American flamethrowers appeared? Tonight, we're diving deep into one of the most frightening chapters of World War II, the battle between America's flamethrower teams and Hitler's supposedly impenetrable Westwall. Chapter 1: Hitler's Concrete Wall. By late 1944, Germany was fighting for survival. The Allied invasion of Normandy had shattered German defenses in France. Paris had been liberated. American armies were racing eastward. For the first time since the war began, enemy soldiers stood at Germany's own borders. That was exactly the scenario Adolf Hitler had feared. Years earlier, Germany had constructed an enormous defensive system stretching roughly 390 miles along its western frontier. The Germans called it the Westwall. The Allies knew it as the Siegfried Line. It wasn't just a single wall. It was a maze. Thousands of concrete bunkers. Anti-tank obstacles. Dragon's teeth. Minefields. Trenches. Hidden artillery positions. Machine gun nests. Underground communication tunnels. Each bunker was carefully positioned to support the next. If one came under attack, another could fire on the attackers from the side. Military engineers call this overlapping fields of fire. It made frontal assaults incredibly costly. To many German soldiers, the Westwall represented safety. Behind thick reinforced concrete, protected by steel doors, they believed they could stop almost anything. Artillery shells? Survivable. Machine gun fire? Almost meaningless. Even tank rounds often failed to penetrate directly. American soldiers quickly learned the same lesson. They could blast away for hours, only to discover that the bunker was still operational. Its machine guns still firing. Its defenders still alive. Something had to change. Chapter 2: America's Deadliest Problem. The U.S. Army had become incredibly effective at combined arms warfare. Infantry, tanks, artillery, engineers, air support. Together they could overcome almost any battlefield obstacle. But concrete bunkers created a unique problem. Unlike enemy troops caught in open fields, pillbox crews barely exposed themselves. Only tiny firing slits were visible. Machine guns fired through openings just inches tall. Trying to shoot back was nearly impossible. Every second spent crossing open ground meant another burst of deadly German fire. Entire squads could become pinned down by just one bunker. American commanders repeatedly faced the same frustrating situation. A single reinforced position could halt an advance involving hundreds of soldiers. Not because it was large, but because it couldn't easily be destroyed. High explosives often missed. Tank shells sometimes ricocheted. Even direct hits frequently damaged the exterior while leaving the defenders alive. Engineers tried explosives, satchel charges, demolition packs, but getting close enough required incredible bravery. Many soldiers never returned. The battlefield demanded a different solution. Not one designed to destroy concrete, but one designed to defeat the men hiding inside it. Chapter 3: The Weapon Nobody Wanted to Face. If there was one weapon capable of changing the psychology of bunker warfare, it was the flamethrower. Contrary to Hollywood movies, American flamethrowers were not magical superweapons. They were heavy, awkward, dangerous even for the operator. A typical U.S. Army flamethrower operator carried nearly 70 pounds of equipment. Fuel tanks, compressed gas, hoses, ignition system, everything strapped directly to his back. If hit by enemy fire, the consequences could be catastrophic. These men knew they were obvious targets. German snipers often prioritized flamethrower operators above everyone else. Yet volunteers kept coming, because they understood something important. Sometimes, only one weapon could finish the job. The M2 flamethrower projected burning fuel roughly 20 to 40 yards, depending on conditions. That meant the operator had to get terrifyingly close. Much closer than anyone wanted. Close enough to hear German voices. Close enough to see movement inside firing slits. Close enough that a single machine gun burst could end the mission instantly. It was among the most dangerous assignments in the U.S. Army. Chapter 4: Fear Inside the Pillbox. Here's something many people misunderstand. The primary danger wasn't always the flames themselves. It was everything that happened afterward. When burning fuel entered a bunker, the oxygen disappeared rapidly. Smoke filled every corner. Temperatures rose dramatically. Visibility vanished. Explosions from stored ammunition became possible. The psychological effect was devastating. Imagine sitting inside a sealed concrete room. You can't escape. The walls trap the heat. Every breath burns your lungs. Smoke blinds you. Someone screams. Another soldier tries opening the steel door. Outside, American infantry are waiting. Even if the flames never directly touched every defender, the bunker itself became nearly uninhabitable. Many German veterans later described flamethrowers as among the most terrifying weapons they encountered during the war. Not necessarily because everyone died, but because survival often depended on escaping immediately. And escaping meant exposing yourself to enemy rifles. The choice became horrifying. Stay inside and suffocate, or run outside into American gunfire. Neither option offered much hope. Chapter 5: Learning Under Fire. The U.S. Army didn't begin the war as experts in bunker warfare. Experience taught painful lessons. In Normandy, American forces repeatedly encountered fortified German positions. Sometimes tanks couldn't elevate their guns enough. Sometimes artillery overshot. Sometimes infantry became trapped for hours. Gradually, new tactics emerged. Engineers worked alongside rifle squads. Machine gunners suppressed firing slits. Mortars forced defenders to stay down. Smoke concealed movement. Meanwhile, a flamethrower team quietly advanced. Every soldier had a role. No one moved alone, because everyone understood one truth. If the flamethrower operator fell, the assault could collapse. Tank crews also adapted. Instead of trying to destroy bunkers outright, some tanks fired continuously at embrasures simply to keep German heads down. Those precious few seconds allowed assault teams to get within range. The cooperation became almost choreographed. Suppress, advance, burn, assault, secure, again and again, across the West Wall. But even with these new tactics, approaching a German pillbox remained one of the deadliest missions in Europe. Every bunker had blind spots, hidden escape routes, backup firing positions. Some concealed entire underground networks connecting multiple fortifications. And the Germans were learning too. They began creating new methods to stop flamethrower teams before they could get close. The result became a brutal contest of adaptation, one that would decide whether America's advance into Germany continued, or ended at Hitler's concrete frontier. Chapter 6: Inside Hitler's Last Fortress. To understand why flamethrowers were so effective, you first have to understand what life was like inside a German pillbox. From the outside, these bunkers looked almost indestructible. Reinforced concrete walls, steel doors, camouflage netting, and thick layers of earth made them blend into the landscape. Some were so well hidden that American soldiers walked within yards of them before realizing they were there. Inside, conditions were cramped. A typical pillbox housed anywhere from 4 to a dozen soldiers. The main room centered around a machine gun aimed through a narrow firing slit. Every inch of space mattered. Ammunition boxes were stacked against the walls. Spare barrels leaned in corners. Grenades, rifles, food, water, radios, and medical supplies were packed into every available space. Ventilation was minimal. A few pipes or vents supplied fresh air, but they were never designed to handle fire. The bunker could withstand shells. It was never meant to survive being filled with burning fuel and choking smoke. For the men inside, safety depended on one belief: that the enemy would never get close enough. Chapter 7: The American Assault. A bunker attack rarely began with the flamethrower. First came reconnaissance. Scouts identified firing slits, escape doors, and possible blind spots. Every approach was studied carefully because one mistake could cost an entire squad. Then artillery opened fire. The objective wasn't always to destroy the bunker. Instead, it was to keep the defenders disoriented. As the barrage lifted, machine guns and tanks immediately took over. American tanks fired high-explosive rounds directly at embrasures. Even if the shells didn't penetrate, the impacts showered the inside with concrete fragments and forced defenders away from the firing slit. At the same time, riflemen poured suppressive fire onto every visible opening. Smoke rounds often blanketed the battlefield, reducing visibility and masking the movement of assault teams. Only then did the flamethrower operator begin moving. He wasn't alone. Riflemen protected his flanks. Engineers carried demolition charges. Automatic riflemen watched for German reinforcements. Every man understood that if the flamethrower operator fell, the assault might fail. The operator advanced in short bursts. A few yards. Dropped to the ground. Another few yards. Bullets cracked overhead. Machine gun rounds struck the earth around him. Then finally he reached range. He stood. A hiss echoed across the battlefield. A stream of burning fuel erupted toward the bunker. Chapter 8: Fire Inside Concrete. The effect wasn't like Hollywood explosions. Instead, the burning fuel splashed across firing slits, doors, and ventilation openings. Liquid fuel seeped inside. It clung to surfaces. Anything combustible ignited almost instantly. Smoke filled the confined space. The oxygen level dropped rapidly. Temperatures climbed to unbearable levels. The defenders suddenly faced a crisis no amount of concrete could solve. Some attempted to continue firing. Others scrambled for gas masks, only to discover that masks offered little protection against extreme heat and rapidly depleting oxygen. Panic spread quickly. One frightened soldier could trigger chaos throughout the bunker. Orders became impossible to hear. Visibility disappeared. The bunker transformed from a fortress into a trap. Many crews chose to surrender within moments. Others burst through emergency exits, hoping to escape the inferno. American infantry were waiting. The assault ended within minutes. A position that might have resisted artillery for hours had been neutralized by one carefully coordinated attack. Chapter 9: Germany adapts. The German army quickly recognized the threat. If flamethrowers reached a bunker, the battle was often over. So they shifted their focus. Don't stop the flames. Stop the man carrying them. Observers watched carefully for soldiers carrying bulky tanks on their backs. Snipers received instructions to prioritize flamethrower operators whenever possible. Machine gun crews concentrated their fire on anyone moving toward blind spots. Mortars targeted likely assault routes. Some bunkers placed additional infantry outside to intercept American engineers before they reached the entrance. Others improved camouflage, making pillboxes almost invisible until attackers were dangerously close. The contest became one of adaptation. Every new American tactic was met with a German response. Every German response forced another American innovation. It was a deadly cycle played out across hundreds of miles of fortified defenses. Chapter 10: The Courage of the Flamethrower Teams. Few battlefield roles demanded more courage. A flamethrower operator carried an obvious target on his back. He moved slowly because of the equipment's weight. He had to approach within just a few dozen yards of enemy positions. And he knew every German soldier could see exactly who he was. Despite these risks, operators repeatedly volunteered for the mission, not because they underestimated the danger, but because they knew their weapon could save the lives of dozens of fellow soldiers pinned down by a single bunker. Many attacks succeeded only because one operator continued advancing under intense fire. In numerous after-action reports, American officers credited flamethrower teams with breaking defensive positions that had stalled entire companies. These were not dramatic movie moments. They were calculated acts of extraordinary bravery carried out under some of the most dangerous conditions imaginable. Chapter 11: When fire wasn't enough. Flamethrowers weren't a universal solution. Some bunkers survived the initial blast. If the burning fuel failed to enter the interior, the defenders could resume firing. In those cases, engineers moved in with satchel charges. Explosive charges were placed against doors or ventilation shafts. After the explosion, infantry rushed forward to secure the position. Other times, American tanks fired point-blank into weakened embrasures. Sometimes repeated assaults were necessary before a bunker finally fell. Every battle was different. Terrain, weather, visibility, and the determination of the defenders all played a role. Even so, the presence of flamethrowers dramatically changed the psychological balance. German soldiers knew that once American assault teams reached the bunker, the fight had entered its most dangerous phase. Chapter 12: Breaking the Westwall. By the autumn of 1944, American forces were steadily pushing through sections of the Westwall. The line was formidable, but it wasn't invincible. Success came not from one wonder weapon but from the combination of infantry, engineers, tanks, artillery, and specialized assault teams working together. Flamethrowers became one part of that larger system. They didn't win battles alone. They made it possible to eliminate defensive positions that otherwise might have delayed the advance for days. Each captured pillbox opened another gap. Each gap weakened the defensive network. Eventually, the supposedly impenetrable West Wall began to crumble. Not because its concrete had failed, but because the men inside could no longer fight from within it. Chapter 13 The Battle of Aachen. By September 1944, American forces had reached the outskirts of Aachen, the first major German city to face a direct assault. For Adolf Hitler, Aachen was more than just another city. It represented German soil. He ordered it held at all costs. That order transformed the city into a fortress. Machine gun nests occupied churches, schools, and factories. Roadblocks appeared on nearly every street. Concrete bunkers around the city formed part of the West Wall's defensive network, forcing American troops into brutal, close-range combat. Every intersection became a battlefield. Every building could conceal enemy soldiers. In this environment, flamethrowers proved devastating. Instead of leveling entire structures with artillery, which risked killing civilians and slowing the advance, American assault teams used flamethrowers to clear fortified positions one by one. Often, defenders surrendered within moments of seeing flames enter a bunker or fortified basement. Others chose to fight until the end. The battle lasted weeks. When Aachen finally fell in October 1944, it marked a turning point. For the first time, Allied troops had captured a major German city. The myth of Germany's untouchable homeland had been shattered. Chapter 14 The Hürtgen Forest. If Aachen was brutal, the Hürtgen Forest was worse. Dense pine forests covered steep hills along the German border. Visibility was limited to only a few yards. Artillery shells exploded in the treetops, sending razor-sharp wood fragments raining down on soldiers below. Rain turned roads into mud. Fog concealed enemy positions. The forest itself became an obstacle. Hidden among the trees were pillboxes connected by trenches and underground shelters. American units often discovered them only after machine guns suddenly opened fire. Traditional battlefield tactics became difficult. Tanks struggled to maneuver through narrow forest trails. Air support was limited. Artillery was less effective because exploding shells struck trees before reaching the ground. Again, assault teams became essential. Engineers crawled forward with demolition charges. Infantry provided covering fire. Flamethrower operators advanced through thick undergrowth, often unable to see the bunker until they were only yards away. It was exhausting, terrifying work. Many attacks succeeded. Others ended in tragedy. The Hürtgen Forest became one of the longest and bloodiest battles fought by the U.S. Army during World War II. Victory came slowly, one bunker at a time. Chapter 15 Why some German crews never surrendered. Despite the fear flamethrowers inspired, not every pillbox crew surrendered. Some fought until their ammunition was exhausted. Others continued firing even after flames entered the bunker. Part of the answer lay in military discipline. Many German soldiers believed surrender meant dishonor. Some feared punishment for abandoning their positions. Others believed relief forces would arrive before the bunker was overrun. There was also ideology. By late 1944, years of propaganda had convinced many that defeat meant the destruction of Germany itself. Some soldiers chose to fight regardless of the odds. American veterans later recalled bunkers where every defender was found dead at his position. These moments served as a reminder that determination could sometimes overcome even overwhelming fear. Yet they were increasingly rare. By the final months of the war, Germany faced severe shortages of experienced soldiers, fuel, ammunition, and supplies. Many bunkers were occupied by exhausted veterans, older reservists, or hastily trained recruits. Even the strongest fortifications could not compensate for a collapsing war effort. Chapter 16 The Psychological Weapon. Flamethrowers inflicted more than physical damage. They attacked confidence. Before an assault, a pillbox crew believed its concrete walls offered protection. After witnessing a neighboring bunker consumed by flames, that confidence disappeared. Fear spread faster than fire. Reports from both Allied and German accounts describe the psychological effect of flamethrowers. Soldiers knew what the weapon could do. They understood that a bunker had limited ventilation. They knew escape routes might be covered by enemy rifles. Sometimes the mere presence of a flamethrower team caused defenders to abandon positions before a single burst of flame was fired. This wasn't because the weapon guaranteed death. It was because it destroyed the illusion of safety. A bunker no longer felt like a fortress. It felt like a trap. Chapter 17: The Cost to American Soldiers. Using flamethrowers came at a tremendous cost. Operators were prime targets. The bulky fuel tanks made them easy to identify. Enemy machine guns and snipers often focused on them first. Many flamethrower operators were wounded or killed before reaching effective range. Their teammates frequently had to retrieve the equipment and continue the mission under fire. The courage required cannot be overstated. These soldiers knowingly accepted one of the most dangerous roles on the battlefield because success often meant saving the lives of dozens of others pinned down by enemy fire. Their actions rarely made newspaper headlines. But on the front lines, infantrymen understood exactly how important they were. Chapter 18: Why the Westwall Failed. The Westwall was an extraordinary engineering achievement. Thousands of bunkers, hundreds of miles of defenses, millions of cubic yards of reinforced concrete. Yet it ultimately failed. Not because the concrete crumbled, but because warfare had evolved. The United States Army didn't rely on a single weapon. Victory came through coordination. Artillery disrupted defenders. Tanks suppressed firing positions. Infantry isolated strong points. Engineers breached obstacles. Flamethrowers neutralized fortified interiors. Each element supported the others. The Westwall had been designed to stop armies. Instead, it faced a military that adapted faster than it could. As one bunker fell, neighboring positions became vulnerable. The defensive network unraveled piece by piece. By early 1945, Allied forces had crossed the Rhine. Germany's western defenses had been broken. The road into the heart of the Third Reich lay open. Chapter 19: Legacy. Today, many of the Westwall's bunkers still stand. Hidden in forests, scattered across fields, silent reminders of one of history's largest defensive systems. Some have become museums. Others have been reclaimed by nature. Walking past them today, it's easy to admire the engineering, but it's impossible to ignore the human story. Inside those walls, young men waited under unimaginable pressure. Outside, other young men advanced across open ground, knowing that every step might be their last. The clash between them was not simply a contest of weapons. It was a test of endurance, training, leadership, and courage. The flamethrower became one symbol of that struggle. Not because it won the war by itself, but because it exposed a fundamental truth. No fortress is truly invincible when the people defending it can no longer fight from within. The Westwall was meant to be Hitler's shield. A barrier of concrete and steel that would halt the Allied advance and protect Germany from invasion. On paper, it looked almost unbeatable. Yet history proved that no defensive line, no matter how impressive, can survive without flexibility, supplies, and the ability to adapt. American flamethrowers were only one piece of a much larger strategy. But in the confined space of a pillbox, they transformed the battlefield. They turned fortified shelters into dangerous traps. They forced impossible choices on the soldiers inside. And they helped open the path that carried Allied forces deep into Germany, bringing the war in Europe closer to its end. The fall of the Westwall wasn't the result of one weapon or one battle. It was the result of determination, innovation, and countless acts of courage from soldiers on both sides of the conflict. Their experiences remind us that behind every bunker, every battlefield, and every military strategy were human beings facing extraordinary circumstances. History remembers the concrete, but it should never forget the people. Chapter 20: The M2 Flamethrower, America's most feared infantry weapon. On paper, the M2 flamethrower didn't look like a war-winning weapon. It weighed more than 70 pounds when fully loaded. Its effective range was usually between 20 and 40 yards, depending on weather conditions and fuel pressure. It carried enough fuel for only a handful of short bursts before needing to be refilled. Compared to a rifle or machine gun, it seemed impractical. But battlefield effectiveness isn't always measured by range. Sometimes, it's measured by what happens in the mind of the enemy. The M2 consisted of two large fuel tanks and a smaller pressurized gas cylinder strapped to the operator's back. A flexible hose connected the tanks to a handheld projector. When the trigger was pressed, compressed gas forced thickened fuel through the nozzle, where an igniter set it ablaze. The result was a controlled stream of burning fuel that could reach into openings ordinary weapons could not. Against troops in open terrain, the flamethrower had limited value. Against reinforced bunkers, trenches, caves, and fortified buildings, it became one of the most specialized assault weapons in the U.S. Army. Its greatest strength wasn't destroying concrete. It was denying defenders the ability to remain inside. Chapter 21 The Men Who Carried Fire. Every flamethrower operator understood one uncomfortable truth. He was often the first soldier the enemy tried to kill. The bulky tanks on his back made him instantly recognizable. German machine gunners knew exactly what those tanks meant. Snipers searched for them. Mortar crews targeted likely approach routes. Many operators survived only because the rest of their squad fought desperately to protect them. Riflemen laid down suppressive fire. Automatic weapons kept German heads down. Smoke concealed movement. Engineers cleared mines and obstacles. The flamethrower operator depended on everyone around him. Likewise, everyone depended on him. If he reached the bunker, the assault usually had a chance. If he fell, the entire attack might stall. It was one of the clearest examples of teamwork on the World War II battlefield. Chapter 22 German veterans remember. Years after the war ended, former German soldiers described many Allied weapons. Artillery, heavy bombers, tanks, machine guns. But when discussing close combat, flamethrowers appeared repeatedly in memoirs and interviews as among the most feared weapons. The fear wasn't simply of being burned. It was the realization that the bunker itself, the place meant to keep you alive, could suddenly become your greatest danger. Veterans recalled hearing the distinctive hiss before seeing any flames. Some remembered smoke filling enclosed spaces within seconds. Others described the intense heat and confusion that made it impossible to coordinate a defense. Many accounts also emphasized that the appearance of a flamethrower often signaled something larger, an organized assault with infantry, engineers, tanks, and artillery working together. The weapon represented the final stage of an attack that had already pinned the defenders down. Chapter 23 More than one weapon. Hollywood often suggests that one flamethrower could single-handedly conquer a bunker. Reality was different. Success depended on combined arms. Combat engineers carried demolition charges. Tank crews fired repeatedly at embrasures to suppress machine gun fire. Mortars dropped smoke rounds to obscure movement. Machine guns prevented defenders from exposing themselves. Infantry secured the area after the bunker was neutralized. Each element supported the others. If any one piece failed, the assault became far more dangerous. Military historians often point to these coordinated tactics, not any single weapon, as one of the defining strengths of the U.S. Army during the campaign against the West Wall. Chapter 24 When concrete wasn't enough. The West Wall had been designed during a different era of warfare. Its engineers assumed that thick concrete, overlapping fields of fire, and fixed defenses would impose unacceptable losses on any attacker. In many situations they were right. The fortifications delayed Allied advances and forced difficult battles. But static defenses have an inherent weakness. They cannot adapt. The attacking force can change tactics. The bunker cannot. As American units gained experience, they learned where firing slits were weakest, how to approach blind spots, how to coordinate suppressive fire, and when to commit engineers and flamethrower teams. Every battle taught new lessons. Those lessons spread rapidly through the army. Meanwhile, Germany struggled to replace experienced troops and maintain its defensive network. By late 1944, many bunkers were occupied by exhausted soldiers with limited supplies and little hope of reinforcement. Even the strongest fortification cannot compensate for a collapsing strategic situation. Transition to Part 5. By the spring of 1945, the once feared West Wall was no longer an unbroken shield. Gap by gap, bunker by bunker, the line had been breached. But one question remains. Could anything have changed the outcome? Could Hitler's engineers, or his generals, have built a defensive system capable of stopping the Allied advance? Or was the fall of the West Wall inevitable from the moment the balance of the war shifted? Chapter 25 Could the West Wall have stopped the Allies? By the autumn of 1944, the West Wall had become Germany's last great defensive barrier in the West. On maps it looked formidable. Hundreds of miles of fortifications. Thousands of bunkers, anti-tank obstacles stretching across fields, interlocking machine gun positions. To Allied planners it promised weeks, perhaps months, of hard fighting. But a defensive line is only as strong as the army defending it. By late 1944, Germany faced problems that concrete alone could not solve. Fuel shortages crippled armored units. The Luftwaffe had lost much of its ability to challenge Allied aircraft. Factories struggled under constant bombing. Railroads were repeatedly disrupted. Experienced soldiers had been killed or wounded across years of fighting on multiple fronts. Many replacements were older reservists, teenagers, or hastily trained recruits. Even if every bunker remained intact, Germany lacked the resources to sustain a prolonged defense. Military historians generally agree that the West Wall delayed the Allied advance, but it could not reverse the strategic balance that had developed by the final year of the war. Chapter 26: The American Advantage. The Allies possessed something the German army increasingly lacked: the ability to combine overwhelming resources with battlefield flexibility. If artillery failed, tanks could take over. If tanks couldn't reach a target, engineers moved forward. If engineers were pinned down, mortars and machine guns created opportunities. If a bunker still held out, flamethrower teams or demolition charges might finally break the defense. No single weapon won these battles. Success came from coordination. Equally important was logistics. American forces could replace damaged equipment, rotate exhausted units, and maintain a steady flow of ammunition, fuel, food, and medical supplies. The German defenders often could not. A bunker without ammunition became a prison. A machine gun without replacement barrels soon overheated. Even the strongest position lost its value when isolated from the rest of the defensive network. Chapter 27: Lessons for Modern Warfare. The campaign against the West Wall influenced military thinking long after World War II. It reinforced an important lesson. Static fortifications alone cannot guarantee security. Modern armies increasingly emphasized mobility, communication, and combined arms operations over fixed defensive lines. Later conflicts continued to show that bunkers and fortified positions could delay an enemy, but rarely stop one that adapted its tactics. Combat engineers became even more important. Urban warfare doctrine evolved. Military planners invested in specialized breaching equipment, precision explosives, armored engineering vehicles, and improved coordination between infantry and armored units. The lessons learned outside German pillboxes echoed through military academies for decades. Chapter 28: The Human Cost. When historians discuss the West Wall, they often focus on maps, bunkers, and battlefield tactics. But behind every concrete structure were people. American infantrymen crossed open fields knowing that a hidden machine gun could end their lives in seconds. Combat engineers crawled through minefields carrying heavy demolition charges. Flamethrower operators advanced toward enemy fire with equipment that made them obvious targets. Inside the bunkers, German soldiers waited in darkness, uncertain whether the next explosion would collapse the roof or force them into a desperate fight for survival. Many were veterans. Many were barely adults. Some believed they were defending their homeland. Others simply hoped to survive another day. War reduced every decision to impossible choices. Advance or stay pinned down. Hold the bunker or surrender. Risk everything, or lose everything. These stories remind us that behind every military operation are individual lives forever changed by conflict. Chapter 29: The End of the West Wall. By early 1945, Allied armies crossed the Rhine. The West Wall had been breached in multiple places. Cities that had once seemed untouchable now lay within reach of advancing forces. Germany's western defenses no longer formed a continuous barrier. Instead, isolated bunkers fought disconnected battles while the front moved steadily east. Some garrisons surrendered peacefully. Others resisted until surrounded. A few continued fighting even after nearby positions had fallen. But the outcome was no longer in doubt. The line that had once symbolized Germany's confidence had become a reminder of how quickly military fortunes can change. Final CR: fire, concrete, and history. The story of the West Wall is often told through engineering. Miles of dragon's teeth, reinforced concrete, steel doors, hidden firing positions. Yet those structures were never the true story. The real story belongs to the soldiers who occupied them, and the soldiers ordered to attack them. American flamethrowers did not magically destroy the West Wall. They were one specialized tool within a much larger system of coordinated warfare. Their effectiveness came from teamwork, planning, and the willingness of infantry, engineers, tank crews, artillerymen, and support units to fight together under extraordinary pressure. For German defenders, the arrival of flamethrower teams represented something larger than fire. It signaled that the bunker had been isolated, that the attackers had reached the final stage of their assault, that the protection of concrete could no longer guarantee survival. The West Wall delayed the Allies. It inflicted casualties. It forced difficult battles. But in the end, no defensive line could compensate for Germany's shrinking resources, deteriorating strategic position, and the growing effectiveness of Allied combined arms tactics. History remembers the bunkers. It remembers the dragon's teeth. It remembers the flames. But perhaps its greatest lesson is this: no fortress, no matter how massive, is truly invincible. Technology changes. Tactics evolve. And wars are ultimately decided not only by walls, but by the people, leadership, logistics, and decisions behind them. As forests reclaimed abandoned bunkers and silence replaced the sound of gunfire, the West Wall faded into history. Today, many of those concrete fortifications still stand across Western Europe. Weathered by decades of rain and snow, they serve as silent witnesses to one of the fiercest campaigns of the Second World War. Visitors who walk among them see only cracked concrete and rusting steel. But beneath those walls lie stories of courage, fear, sacrifice, and survival. Stories of soldiers who faced impossible odds on both sides of the battlefield. Understanding those stories doesn't glorify war. It helps us understand its human cost. Because every battlefield is more than a map. Every bunker is more than concrete. And every chapter of history is ultimately about the people who lived through it. If you enjoyed this documentary and want more in-depth military history told through cinematic storytelling, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Every week, we explore the forgotten battles, remarkable innovations, and untold stories that shape the modern world. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next documentary.